having the courage to sort of ask for help or even say, hey, what about? That's a hard thing to do because it forces you to be a little bit vulnerable.
My guest today is an 11-year NFL linebacker. On top of that, he was a leader amongst players in the locker room. Ended up being the player rep and a guy who took charge, took a leadership position during the NFL players' dispute. He is a guy who's thoughtful. He's a guy that cares about other people so much that at the end of his playing career, he actually took over as the head of schools, what would be a principal for a school down in the Monterey area. He's a fantastic human being. He's a dear friend, and he's a guy you're going to want to hear from. Scott Fujita is my guest today on Everyday Great. Great day, everyone. I'm Mike Pawlawski, former world champion quarterback, serial entrepreneur, and award-winning TV producer and host. I've lived a life dedicated to mastery through performance and mindset integration. Each week, I'll bring you the insights, strategies, and stories from some of the world's top performers to help you unlock your greatness. Whether you're an athlete aiming for the top or an executive driving your team to victory, this is where you learn how to train your greatness to become an everyday great. Now let's get after it. Scott Fujita, welcome to the show, brother.
Mike, appreciate it. So good to see you. Good to catch up as always.
Always good to see you. And the reason I brought you on is you are one of those guys in my mind who epitomizes leadership. You were as a player, even as a young player, you were a guy, and a guy who always made people around them better. And so that's what I love to talk about on this show. The Everyday Great podcast, my book, Everyday Great, is about helping people to be better, to maximize their potential, to optimize performance. And so you are a guy that did that both in your own life, but for other people around you. Where did that come from for you?
Great question. And I wish I had an answer and I can give you sort of the good soundbite. I don't necessarily know, and I don't know that I have it all figured out. And I think I'm still figuring those things out. I think I was very fortunate throughout my life to have some opportunities presented to me. And I think, so much of life is timing and opportunity. I certainly had to work to take advantage of those opportunities, but you mentioned, getting to know me as a freshman at Cal. I didn't take the easy path to get to Cal, right? I mean, I wasn't really recruited anywhere. Cal gave me a chance to come in and walk on. Some opportunity presented itself, and I think you have to just take care of those things that are within your control to be able to take advantage of those opportunities. I tell kids all the time, control the controllables. I think if you're someone who doesn't take care of those things, which are under your control, then that's just stupid, in my opinion. So I think I always had, for whatever reason, an instinct to farm my land and farm it well, knowing myself well. I always tell the kids as well, know thyself, know what your strengths are, know what your weaknesses are. And if you know that, you know yourself in that, and you can control your little sandbox and give everything you can to that sandbox, that puts you in best position to take best advantage of those opportunities when they come your way. Now, whether that transfers into leadership and things like that, I don't know. But I've always respected people who just took care of their stuff, got their stuff done, who put the work in, yes, but we're also good people, and they try to see the best in each other. So I think I was around people like that throughout my sort of high school, college, professional career. And I think some of that may have rubbed off on me. But I think so much comes down to just farming your own land and farming it well.
I love that quote. That is a fantastic quote. I'm sure you have, you're a Cal guy. Have you heard of self-determination theory?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So self-determination theory is all about, the things that you can control, and control being one of those, right, in your life. And so farm your land and farm it well. I'm stealing that for sure. That's going to be a quote coming off of this. It's awesome.
I think one of the big things, and I tell I mentioned to you before we got started, I'm just transitioning out of a 6-year run as the head of a school, down at a preschool through 8 independent school down here in Monterey County. And I've loved the experience, and I love the ride that it's been on. But one thing I talk to my staff all the time, I talk to the kids all the time, the students, any teams I coach, the players, and they're always surprised to hear this, but I say to them all the time, most things in life, motivation usually follows action. It's not the other way around. I think we all wait to be motivated to do something. And I think we're almost hardwired, and our instinct says you got to be motivated before you sort of take that first step. But what I sort of coach, and again, my teachers, my faculty, everybody, all the kids around constantly, is that motivation usually follows action. And if they say, what do you mean by that? It can be really hard to get yourself motivated to do some things. Think about sitting down to write a term paper. That's hard to get yourself motivated to do that. To pick up a book and read a new book, to go for a run in the morning, to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning to do your workout. Whatever it is, those things are hard to get yourself to do. So what do you got to do? Sometimes if you just take action, take that first step, getting out of bed in the morning. Yeah, you got to get your ass out of the bed in the morning. You take that first step, usually motivation will follow, right? You got to write a term paper. Well, just start writing, and guess what? The motivation usually is going to follow. So it's actually the inverse of what we would all think. And that is where the motivation typically comes. So you got to just take that first step and take action just to give yourself a fighting chance.
That is so good. So two different things. Our Timothy Pitchell, who was the procrastination writer for Psychology Today, right? He actually did a study on this with kids who were in school, and they had term papers or big assignments due, and they would call them during the week and say, "Hey, have you started that yet? What do you think?" And when they hadn't started yet, they're like, "Oh my God, it's gonna be so tough and it's so difficult, and I can't believe how big this assignment is." And then as soon as they started the paper, they're like, "Oh yeah, it's not so big," right?
Mm-hmm.
And so procrastination makes things bigger than they are. Got to take action, right? Confidence follows action. I agree 100% with that. And the other thing is, that's our human brain, right? The amygdala firing off. When you get in action, when you walk, your amygdala gets suppressed. So you can't have the fear response, or else you could never walk anywhere, right? We'd be scared to death no matter where we went. So that fires that down. Once you get in action, once you get in movement, then your fear calms down, your nervous system kicks in, and you can perform. So it's an awesome lesson. And it's a lesson that we had to learn as players all the time, right? How many times did you not know what you were doing the first time you stepped into a drill? How many times, like every day as an athlete, they are trying to make you do things that you can't do yet to learn things that you don't know yet. And that's a huge lesson for people, I think.
Oh, no, for sure. I just had that conversation with I have 3 daughters now. The twins are almost 17. My youngest is 12. So we were sitting around the breakfast table last week, and there was a conversation we were on about what you just said. So these lessons where, everyone just sort of assumes or takes for granted the fact that not everybody knows these things. I love the phrase, when you know better, you do better. Well, not everybody knows. And to your point, we're not always being coached through the steps or whatever the executive functioning skills that are required to complete a task. So I told the girls, because that's a conversation we were on, I talked to them about my first ever workout in the weight room at Cal. And it came from a high school program where, yes, we worked out, but I had no idea what the hell I was doing. And it was my first time going into a program that was going to be sophisticated in some degree. And I remember it was just about that, not knowing what was expected of us, what the hell we were supposed to do, and what the semantics and the language was around the gym. So we were in there in the weight room, and they were doing a bench press test. And I think the idea was to figure out what our 1 rep max would be. And I had never really done that before. I knew how to lay down on my back and press weight off my chest, but that's all I knew. So we go.
And you're a long arm guy too, so like
the idea was, I think, the idea was to sort of build up to what our eventual 1 rep max might become. So you throw 135 on the bar, you do it 3 or 4 times. So we're slowly warming up. So now we're getting to 185, 205, and at my age at that time, that was getting to be a lot of weight. So as you're getting closer to what that 1 rep max would be, then you should only be doing 1 rep each time, right? Because you're trying to save it up for the big payoff at the end. So I get to 205, and I'm struggling a little bit, but I'm repping this thing out 4, 5, 6 reps. And Kevin Steets was his name, who was the assistant strength coach at the time. He was spotting me, and he's screaming at me, "Racket, racket." I don't know what the hell racket. I think he's getting pumped up and trying to get me pumped up, right? So I end up repping out and burning out at 5 or 6 reps on 205.
Right.
Feeling good about myself because he's screaming at the top of his lungs. He was telling me to put the weight back up to preserve myself for the next thing. So it's just, we don't always just intuitively know. People have to be taught.
Yeah, most of the time. That's a great story, by the way. Most of the time, people don't know. Like you do stupid things based on assumptions.
Yeah.
I assume that this is what I'm supposed to do, so I do it, and then people are like, "What is this guy doing?" Especially around football all the time. I mean, that's a huge part of the hazing early on.
No doubt.
Because you have no idea what you're doing when you come into a program.
For sure. So long story short, I did not start with a very good 1 rep max at Cal.
Yeah, but it was a solid 6 reps. So that's that's always good. 6 reps at 205 will translate to something like 250, 260, right? That's like a weight room math that I don't know.
Yeah.
So talk about growing from there, right? As that freshman who didn't know coming in, and talk about the learning process for you. What was that like? How do you grow as a player? How did you grow as a person at Cal?
I think it all comes down to people, and I think having good people around you who are either willing to show you, and or even if it's not showing you in terms of walking you through the steps, being able to show what those steps are or to act out what those steps are for you. I was fortunate. I had my position in defensive coordinator, who Lyle Setton-Sitch.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he was such a good teacher of the game, so I had someone like him, right? I had a veteran presence around me, Sekou Sanika, Matt Beck, these guys who knew football, knew it well. They're football junkies of sorts. And yeah, they weren't sitting down and watching film and walking me through it necessarily, but I got to see how they operated. So I think half of success in life is just having people who can model doing things the right way for you. So that was a big part of, I think, my journey. And then as you sort of lean into that, and then when your time comes, and I think a lot of it has to do with delayed gratification as well. I think we're living in a society and a world now where, we don't have any patience for anything anymore, right? I think everybody needs to sort of take a breath and learn how to relearn patience. This is very much a now, me culture, where the sort of delayed gratification and the long-term payoff, give it whatever the transfer portals and everything else that comes with that, putting the time in, right? And the time it takes to, maybe it takes 2 or 3 or 4 years to get on the field.
For sure.
That's the old school person in me. I value that process. And I had that process in all the places I was, because I had good people around me who can model what it's supposed to look like. And all I had to do was just follow what they did, and it worked out well for me.
Yeah, I was the same way. Troy Taylor was the quarterback ahead of me at Cal, now the head coach at Stanford, which is weird, but the head coach at Stanford. And he, like, I would be in the meeting room, and he wasn't necessarily saying, you need to do this, X, Y, and Z, but we'd be watching film, and something would come up and be like, what about? And he'd go, yeah, we slide the opposite way because we've got 4-man side, and that's how we take, something technical that I would have never known.
Yep.
And something that you don't decipher without really analyzing stuff. And so having that shortcut from guys that know is a huge, huge piece of it.
Yeah, and having the courage, what you just said. So you're watching something with Troy, and then you say, hey, what about? Having the courage to say, well, what about? That's another hard thing for, especially guys in our sort of meathead, football mindset. Having the courage to sort of ask for help or even say, hey, what about? That's a hard thing to do, because it forces you to be a little bit vulnerable. So to have the guts to ask the question, have someone like Troy on the other end who's willing to walk you through it. I mean, those are such powerful tools for success.
Yeah, and that goes 2 ways too, really, because it's not just having the courage, yes, and we'll talk about that in just a second, but also like the guy in the meetings, and not just for football, but you're in a sales meeting and you've got a question and you don't want to look like the dumb guy in the meeting. You don't want to ask the question, or there's something that you want to ask your customer to make sure that you can serve them, and you don't ask the question.
Right.
Now you don't make the sale because you're not on the same page with your customers. So just asking that question more times than not leads to good things.
Absolutely.
Rather than what we fear, right? We always fear other people's opinion. Michael Gervais talks about that, and the fear of other people's opinions. Just ask the question.
Yeah.
Like, step out and ask the question.
Yeah.
Nobody will think you're stupid.
Right.
Like it's going to be okay.
Yeah.
But to kind of take the other aspect on that, you became a guy who made it possible for younger players to ask the question. You became a leader in that respect. To me, that's a true leader. Troy Taylor was a great leader because I could ask him the question. He didn't make me feel dumber. And there's always hazing. There's a rite of passage, right? We're gladiators out there. But he didn't make me feel dumb for asking the question. He made it okay to step up and to seek knowledge. Yeah. You have always been that dude from the time that I've known you. Talk to me about how, and again, I'm going to ask like the deep probing questions because people at home are trying to find these answers. How did you become that guy? Why? Let me tell my story. I had a Troy Taylor who coached me through it. I had older players who made it possible for me to ask. We had a guy in my high school who was a jackass, and you couldn't do anything around him. And I did not like that guy, and I didn't want to be that guy. So as soon as I found nurturing leaders who would let me ask the question, I thought, oh, that's the guy I want to be. Like, I want to be the guy that helps younger players when I get that chance. And so with that, I ask you, how did you get to where you were that way?
Yeah, I don't mean to avoid the question, but I think it comes again down to the people that I was around. And so much of that has to do with culture and just the right kinds of people. I think my whole life have struggled with like this extreme degree of imposter syndrome. And, whether that's, because perhaps it's because I was adopted into, a family where my dad's Japanese American, doesn't look like me, outgrew him by, probably 6th grade. And now I'm a foot taller than him. Right. And then, the community I grew up in, all my best friends and guys I grew up with were, from Hispanic families, Black families, Polynesian families. Then I go into college and I'm a walk-on. So always wondering, do I belong here or not? Then I go into the NFL. And again, still the question is late round draft pick, does he really ever belong or not? You've been in a locker room just like me, where most of your, the folks in your community are people of color. So everywhere I've gone, I ask myself that question with, crazy amounts of anxiety and this feeling of imposter syndrome. Like, do I belong here or not? Am I good enough? Will they welcome me? And, without question, I can say this, almost on the verge of getting emotional about it. I was always welcomed and received everywhere I was. And I'm just so grateful for the opportunities and, all the essays that I sat around the lunch table with in high school who brought me into their crew. And like those were my guys. Those are the guys I played football with. And most of them topped out at 5'6", but God, they were tough as hell. And they brought me into their wing. And those were my people, right? So I was always so fortunate to have those people around me. So I think because I had this sense of imposter syndrome, and then every step of the way, I felt it in a renewed way. It's like, oh shit, here we go again. My last journey, right? As a head of school, I was the unconventional candidate coming into the job. I remember stepping into my first meeting with my whole faculty and staff, and I got 50 adult eyes looking at me now as their new leader. And I don't speak their language because I don't have decades of experience in education. Like, talk about imposter syndrome and anxiety, looking them in the eyes, people who I value, respect, appreciate as teachers, and then saying, hey, follow my lead. And guess what? They had my back. And when I needed their help, they would answer the questions where I needed help. I knew my lane. I knew it wasn't my lane. So it's just having that sense of acceptance from every path of the journey for me. And I think I was so grateful for that. Right at the very least, you make yourself available and foster that kind of community culture where people can feel comfortable asking the question, bringing people along for the ride. Marcus Patton, he was a senior linebacker when I got drafted in Kansas City. He grabbed me one day after practice. He said, come do some extra wind sprints with me. That set me on a path of conditioning and fitness. Just him grabbing me, this 13-year veteran linebacker, grabbed me to run with him. And he said to me at the end of that, he said, it's a lot easier to stay in shape than it is to get in shape. And he said, one thing you can control, Scott, he said, every time you come in a training camp, you can control how conditioned you are. He said, so that's completely under your control. For someone who doesn't come in conditioned, you're an idiot, right?
Right.
So I had that message just in my first week as a Kansas City Chief from a guy who just accepted me and said, this is how we do it. So I just been surrounded by opportunities where people welcomed me in, showed me what love and acceptance looks like. And I feel like, if you genuinely appreciate that, then you're going to pay it forward.
That is awesome. Thank you for that vulnerability. I mean, because imposter syndrome, I've had the same thing my whole life, right? You and I have talked about this in the past. My history, my growing up as that kid who grew up with pneumonia, cystic fibrosis, like the lung disease, feeling outside, like I could never be there. I wasn't part of it. And so that imposter syndrome followed me throughout my entire career too. And so I totally get it. People at home who feel that, right? You have, and then I knew Scott was going to be great the first time I met him, and Scott was doubting that he was going to be great.
Yeah.
And so people who know you outside of you, being me or your friends or whoever it is at home, like they can see the true depth and breadth of you, whereas sometimes we can't see it in ourselves. And that's where that imposter syndrome comes from.
Absolutely. I think guys like us, I think football conditions us, it's one snap and clear, and you're so trained to move on, right? So we can present and put on this almost facade as being super steady and composed. And that's, you're a quarterback, you're a leader. I was the linebacker. So we're perceived as these leaders. And so much of it is just being able to sort of calm your nerves and control your pulse and stay composed, or at least appear composed, because football conditions us to do that so well, because you got 35 seconds, you're on to the next play. So you have to be able to do that. Whereas under the surface, all the wiring might be frenetic and all over the place, but we have the ability to present as such, where everyone might think that things are easy for us. They're not. They're not. I mean, every morning we got to get out of bed just like everybody else and say, oh shit, here we got another day. I don't know what the day is going to bring. But what I'm going to take a step forward and have confidence and faith that people on the other end of this thing are going to be there for me. Every day is a new adventure.
That is the absolute truth. The opening of my book is in the tunnel. Mm-hmm. That pregame where everything is like you are at DEFCON 5, like you are ready to go. And it's in the Arena Bowl for our Arena Bowl league, right? We had built up for so many years to try to finally get to that point. You played in a Super Bowl, so you know exactly what that's like, that big game mentality in the tunnel when you have all the nerves. And it's amazing that we don't always see it in other people, but everybody feels it.
Yeah. So true.
It's crazy. Everybody feels it. And so that's where that imposter syndrome comes from, is we think that nobody else senses what we're feeling, right? Yeah. We get these somatic senses, we get the emotions, and we think, oh, I'm the only one not keeping it together.
Yeah.
When that's just your nervous system, right? Yeah. It's your nervous system is going, hey, stay safe. Hey, don't get eaten by the tiger. That's what it's doing in the moment when there is no tiger, but their nervous system is doing it too. I try to tell this to my kid.
Yeah.
Because, when he started wanting to date and wanting to talk to girls, I'm like, hey, bud, they feel just as nervous as you do.
Yeah.
Like when you're going to talk to them and they start giggling, that's because they're nervous too. Like
Right.
it's not just you. Everybody else feels this too.
Mhm.
So it's huge, important lesson. You got to a point there too. Marcus Patton, by the way, there's a guy that I played against at UCLA. You played with in the league, which is pretty funny. It's a crossover. Fuji and I are about 10 years apart in terms of age. And so the crossover for guys, when you run into them in conference, but building culture with guys from different teams, different programs, right? You were a guy who could do that. You did it at Cal. I watched how guys rallied around you at Cal. Talk to me about the importance, because now, like you said, you went from being ex-athlete to athletic director to, I want to call it headmaster, but they call it head of school. Is that right?
Head of school, yeah. Principal, yeah. But head of school is the title.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so you did that at All Saints Day School, and you were able to step into that role and build culture everywhere you went. What is the key to building culture?
I think the word authenticity gets overused, but I think it's so critical. I mean, oftentimes things become cliche because they're true, right? So I think just being yourself, and you just mentioned the word vulnerability. I think being able to walk into a room and just recognizing the fact and being able to own the fact that you don't have all the answers. I think that's a big part of it. Recognizing, hey, there's areas where, I don't have all the answers, whether it's in football or it's in, producing a documentary film or in the players union or, in a faculty meeting in a school setting. No one person has all the answers. And to me, someone who pretends like they do, that person's probably the problem. So I think it's just, I think it's fostering that kind of culture. Again, collaboration. We all talk about the importance of collaboration. Probably one of those overused buzzwords in the business culture, but it's real. And there's a reason it's become an overused buzzword, because it's so important. Just like in a team setting, we all have our strengths and weaknesses, and it's just so critical to find a way to check your ego at the door, and to be able to walk in as your authentic self and be able to work with everybody and just have an open dialogue where you're not the be all end all and you don't have all the answers. I love my experience these last 6 years in education, because I actually knew in every room I was in, I probably was the dumbest person in the room, and I actually loved that. I knew that I had a view of the world that most of those in the room didn't have. It's particularly through pandemic years, for instance, right? I'm coming into my first year and a half on the job was dealing with the pandemic. Because I didn't have the decades of experience in education, I don't think I was as married to the way things have always been done. So I can come into a brainstorm with some of those folks on like the lead admin team and say, all right, so what could this look like if we chose to open up again? Okay, I know that's the way it was in the past with all kids sitting in rows and desks staring at the front. Well, if we're going to reimagine what school looks like to be able to get kids back on campus, which we think is important, we got to find a different way to attack this problem. So all ideas are welcome, and it turns into a game of X's and O's, right? But we put up the whiteboard, and it's like, okay, these kids are going over here, these kids are going over there. Here's what this teacher's going to do down here. And it literally was like putting together a playbook for reimagining what school could look like. And we were the only school in all of Monterey County who was open that entire school year, because we had sort of a plan that the county health officer blessed for us. We had some creativity, and we weren't paralyzed by the way things have always been done. So I think it's just fostering a culture where don't pretend like you have all the answers, because you don't. And again, like I said before, if you act like you do, people are going to see right through you, and they're not going to respect you. Owning your mistakes, and when you've made an error, being able to acknowledge that in front of a group. Hey, that was my bad on that one. Guess what? We learned from it, and here's how we're going to move forward. Those things to me are just the basic fundamentals of organizational behavior that I think are just so critical. And those are the easy, low-hanging fruits as well, to foster the kind of culture that I think is important.
Yeah, amazing. Those are the best teams too, right? Best teams are the collaborative teams. We had an offensive coordinator the year that we won the Arena League championship, I would come in every Monday. He'd come in with like 75 plans. He was really, really smart, really good coach. He was young. And so he had a play for everything. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, we're only going to, we're going to call Storm 6 times. We're going to call Pig 6 times. We're going to run a pop a couple times. By the end of it, we've only got like 30 plays left to call. I don't think we need 75 plays for that, do we? And so we would literally whittle down the game plan, but he was open for input. Mm-hmm. And I was open as a guy who led the league in passer rating for the last 5 years to hearing his input as a young coach. Like I wanted to hear new stuff that could change my opinion or change my perspective to see what I couldn't see on the field. Because you get locked in this box of this, dogma. I'm locked in this dogma of where it's all at. And so that was always fascinating to me. And our head coach was an O-line guy. So his perspective was key for me. And then, I have receivers from the inner city. I have offensive linemen coming from Secaucus, New Jersey. Like that mixing pot of people, the different ideas makes a locker room an amazing place. And people pigeonhole jocks as kind of these dumb guys, like gladiators. But actually, to play in the NFL, to play at other levels, you got to be pretty darn smart. And so you always add something to the mix, I think.
Yeah. And I always wonder, how well you can replicate that football, sort of any sport, the locker room culture and other aspects, right? And, we don't need to get into politics, but how polarized the world is. But really, we were talking face to face with somebody. We're all so much more, similar than everyone gives us credit for. You either do the doom scrolling or follow the headlines down whatever path you're on. You would think everyone hates each other when the sky is falling and the world's falling apart. But when you get people in the same room together with a shared common purpose, it's actually not that complicated.
Yeah, unless people are pitching headlines at each other.
Yeah.
We are, human beings are like 98% similar in terms of what we want, what we need, how we thrive, and all of those things. You and I may have different political opinions, but you and I want the same thing.
Absolutely.
I want the best for people. I've known you, like I said, since you were 18 years old. I know that you want the best for people. How we get there, that's based on our experience.
Absolutely.
But as long as you're willing to try different things to see what then works, I think gets you to wherever you need to be. That's the way I look at it. I always told my camera guys when we did our show for years and years, you've been on the show, so you understand. Hey, suggest whatever you want, as long as you're cool with me saying no too, because we're doing something else. Like I am all for input at all times. And you guys, you're running your camera, so you're running the show from there. And I can only go with what you get. Throw it out there. Let's see if it works. And we did stuff, and guys like Bill and guys like Eric Verkautren, who you met, like these guys made my show so much better because they had ideas that I didn't have at the time. I was in this lane of thinking. Yeah. So I just think that's so important. Yeah. I think you obviously 3 girls, so girl dad, tough, right? Because you don't have that experience as a female, but then you've been around kids growing, learning, doing all that. Talk about that impressionable young mind, because I think that's so important, and how you could just literally see them learn, see them adjust and grow, and how you can maximize it.
Yeah, same way we talked about, trying to have, models around us like Marcus, like Troy, et cetera. I think kids are mirrors of us. And everybody wants, the playbook on what it means to be a good parent or what it means to be a good teacher. But it gets down to sort of the basics and sort of the fundamentals of how we model things for our kids. Obviously a lot's being said around phone use and social media and all these things, right? To me, it's like, every year when I stand up and I give sort of the back to school night address at school, it's almost like I'm pleading, with parents who, again, they all want the same things. But at the end of the day, the reality is, are you wanting to and willing to be your child's parent and not just their friend, right? I think we all generally understand, what the best things are for these kids. But you also got to be willing to have your child upset with you for a little bit. So things like that in terms of kids' development is so much about modeling it. And I've been so many times where, parents are like, gosh, I just, I can't get my 5th grader, off of his or her cell phone. And now they're just on social media all night, every night. Okay, go back and say to me what you just said. Oh, yeah, my kid just won't stay off of this phone. He's on social media all night. Okay, say that one more time. Yeah, my kid. And how old is your kid? 10 years old. Okay, now you realize, I'm not going to be this direct with people, but you realize how stupid that sounds and how easy that is to fix. Oh, yeah, but then I would have to take the phone away. Well, yeah, it's some things are just not that complicated. So kids need love. They need structure. Kids thrive on routine. And if we, as the adults in their lives, are modeling that or fostering that environment for them, that's on us. It's so easy to say the kids these days. And, when I walk into any restaurant setting, all I see are a bunch of adults on their phones first, and then I see the kid with the iPad in his lap. No one looking at each other, right, having a conversation, engaging, right? I feel like 95% of the world problems can be solved around the dinner table with one's family. So I see too many of us, the adults, modeling the wrong things. And I don't mean to preach or get on my high horse because I'm guilty of it sometimes too. my kids wake up in the morning and I've been up for 3 hours because I'm such an early riser. They come out and maybe I'm on my phone doing some work of some kind. And if it takes me, a minute or two to look up and acknowledge they walked in the room, I mean, shit, shame on me. That one's on me. So I'm trying to figure this path out as well. But like collectively, again, as the adults in the room, our fundamental responsibility is to create a world that's safe for our kids and to help launch them into a world as prepared as possible. And I am tired of the blaming of the kids because so many of these things can be fixed by the adults in the room.
100,000,000%. I agree with that. And it was funny. I was talking to, I'm in a mastermind, and I was talking to the group, and there's millennials in this thing. And I said, the fact that millennials are like they are is our fault. Gen X, right? It's the self-esteem movement where self-esteem was the most important thing in the world, and program people for the reward was the most important thing, right? The outcome was the most important thing instead of the work that you have to put into it.
Yeah.
And I'm literally just finishing this chapter in my book about doing hard things in life because it's so important to have to face hard things in life. And as a parent, taking away the digital dopamine boost of the phone or the iPad is a hard thing because you're going to have that fight with your kid, and nobody wants to see their kid suffer, right? It's human connection. You don't want to see your kid, but you're going to see them suffer far worse over a longer period of time if you don't teach them how to deal with hard circumstances. And you were talking about that conversation. Talk about how important that is for people. Athletes have to get it, right? You talked about it, white knuckling through fear and white knuckling through like imposter syndrome. But how important is it to learn how to do hard things in life?
Yeah, it's so critical. So I think we've become programmed for the positive, happy outcome. And I think so often we talk often about the fruit of one's labor, and what is the fruit? Super Bowl, whatever those things are at the end. Big paycheck, new contract. I mean, those are I would say the fruits of one's labor. But I mean, maybe the labor is the fruit. I mean, that's another way of looking at that. So I think being able to and willing to do hard things, and adults helping kids do hard things. Hard things don't have to be bad. I mean, work can be fun. There can be so much value in the structure and the routine from work. But there's just so much is placed on that outcome. I know there was a study that was done, and I was at a conference a couple years ago for educators, and they had talked about, it was a survey that had been replicated over a couple of generations, over 30 or 40 years. And they asked the question, would you rather have your child be happy or be good? And then how the responses to that survey changed over the course of 30 or 40 years was pretty remarkable. So in the early decades of the survey, it was, I want my child to be good. I want my child to be good. And over time, sort of that J curve starts to go up, happy, 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 happy. At what expense, right? So I think the damage or the havoc that we're causing on these kids, for the outcome to solely be about happiness alone. We all want happy, healthy kids, right? But that becomes the top priority. Again, at what cost? What does that mean for the diet, access to social media, access to the technology? All the things that we all fundamentally know aren't good for humans. Right. We're just giving in excess. So it's just about it's getting back to the basics. We all overthink so much, and sometimes there are some fundamental things that'd be nice for that pendulum as it swings, and politically, socially, etc. Just getting back to the basics. Those are some of the things that are so critical.
Yeah, I mean, you can't get hooked on happiness, right? It's a drug. Happiness is a drug. And then you can never chase it. It's never quite as good as the last time, right? It's never quite as good as I remember it. Mm-hmm. And it's the same idea with the digital stuff, right? You start to program your brain that you need this input constantly, and all of a sudden you go without it, and you're at a loss. You're just in panic because you don't have something there to soothe you with that input. And so it's kind of insane. The other thing that struck me when I was listening to you talk, because it was my experience, is the big event. We work for the ring, right? We work to get to the Super Bowl. And then you go and you play, and it's great. Then you win or you lose, whatever happens, right? But we won, and it was great. And then the next day, I was like, and then what?
Yeah.
Like, talk about and then what? Like, how that leaves you feeling when you play in that big game and you work for, right? You've got your eye on this prize for so long,
Yep.
You've been working to play in the Super Bowl since you were a kid in high school, right? And then you get to the Super Bowl, and then what?
Yeah, I think you don't have the benefit of hindsight or history, while you're living it. It's not until after the fact, that you look back and it's like, hey, maybe it was more about the journey, or maybe the labor was the fruit. I mean, obviously I wasn't saying that when I was, 25, 28, 30, whatever those,
Right.
I'm looking back now from this point in my life, hoping to maybe communicate something to your listeners and viewers, that might help them out, because I'm trying to figure those things out as well. But yeah, there is that letdown, at the end of the day. I mentioned today's my first official day unemployed again, right? I had this great, experience at the head of school. Yesterday was my last official day on the job. And this morning I woke up and it's like, okay, like, what's life going to look like now? We sort of had to climb the mountain in terms of what climbing a mountain looks like in a school setting. And, I'm so proud of, what was accomplished, and all the things that come with that. And the Super Bowl quest, we get to New Orleans right after Hurricane Katrina, and then we begin this 4-year march and end up winning the Super Bowl. And then that's over. And then I'm in Cleveland, where all careers go to die. And it's like, well, okay, now what? So it's just, again, I think we're programmed to chase, and there's value in the chase too. It's like, I know I'm kind of speaking out of both sides of my mouth, having these goals that are aspirational, right? And it's putting together, and we talked about the idea of executive functioning and what it takes to sort of each step to be able to execute and sort of achieve at a high level. You have to have that goal, and whatever that looks like for you. Maybe it's a vision board. Maybe it's your own set of internal core values. Maybe it's a Super Bowl. It's different for everybody. But I'll tell you, it's more about the steps that it takes to get there. We think about in all of our lives, like, what are those sort of, the big sort of life-defining moments. You could probably count them on one hand. Maybe it's, getting a college degree for some people. Maybe it's getting married. Maybe it's having your first child. Maybe it's getting a graduate degree. But for me, getting a college scholarship after being a walk-on. Maybe it's a Super Bowl. I mean, so it's different for everybody. But the big sort of move the needle type moments in one's life, you can probably count them on one hand. But it's like all the little in-between moments, that seem mundane, and just, that might feel like a waste of one's time. That's the good stuff. So it's finding ways to tap into making those important, taking action on those things, not waiting to become motivated to do those things. It's all those little in-between moments that here we are now in our 40s and 50s, Mike, looking back on sort of our journeys. It's like, well, shit, those are the things that matter the most. It wasn't the Super Bowl ring, which sits in the back of my underwear drawer and I never look
Right.
at it anymore. It's the 8 or 9 guys on the text thread who I'm still in touch with every single day, just telling stories or talking about, what Biden did last night or Trump did last night, and we all have a fun little debate about it. It's like, remember so-and-so in the locker room before that one game? It's not about the Super Bowl ring. It's about the journey. And oh my gosh, remember how hard, off-season training was that one year? Or gosh, Sean Payton and our first, training camp in Jackson, Mississippi at Millsaps College. We went 30 days straight of double days before he finally gave us a day off. And then the tagline was, and on the 31st day, they rested. Like, those are the kind of things that we talk about now. So we're programmed for the outcome and the outcome alone. And I think oftentimes we neglect and don't place enough priority and emphasis on all the little in-between moments. So yeah, the outcome is important to help drive us towards something. But let's make sure we're driving the right way.
Yeah, I've got hummingbird feeders in the back of my house now, right? Classic old guy. But the hummingbird feeders in the back of my house now, and hummingbirds remind me to suck the nectar out of life, right? To suck the nectar while you're there. Like, don't wait for that big moment at the end. Yeah. I just love because they have to constantly eat, because they have these metabolisms that are off the charts, right? You keep your wings moving that fast, I guess you have to.
Let me ask you this. Did you put those back there for that reason? Or did you put them back there because you wanted to have hummingbirds in the backyard? And then that was sort of the analogy and the metaphor that you drew from that? Because I love that.
I was back there meditating. We put them back there. I think my wife wanted them. They came down. Anyway, we got them somehow. It was at the house, and I love projects anyway. And my wife wanted them, so I filled it up, put it back there, and I was meditating. I was literally in the middle of meditating, and the hummingbirds came out there, and I could hear it during my meditation, and I opened my eyes, and that's what struck me.
Yeah.
This thing's literally sucking the nectar out, and I'm like, that's kind of what I'm doing here in this meditation. Yeah. Like, I'm in this moment trying to suck the nectar, just enjoying it for the moment. That's the point of meditation, right? Removing yourself. It's that second where you can remove yourself from impulse and response to kind of just feel yourself in the moment. That's where you find peace with the nervous system.
Yeah.
And that then, to me, that just kind of struck me. And so it's become a thing for me that I just, every time I see hummingbirds now, I just smile about it. It reminds me to suck the nectar out of life. Just kind of
that's cool.
Every
really
moment out of it. And you spoke to it too, right? My teammates. There's a story in the book about our championship game where I talk about my teammate Greg Hopkins looking over at me, and this is my guy. He was my roommate on the road, like he was my dude. And right as we're going to the huddle, he looks at me and goes, "Hey, Pawlawski, don't fuck this up." And most people would be like, "Oh my God, you can't, how can you do that?" It's, putting pressure on. But right there, when he said that to me, I knew we got this. Like, there's no way he would say something like that to me if he didn't have absolute 100% faith.
Yep.
Right. And so those moments of we got pulled over and got tickets while we were bass fishing on the Mohawk River because I was a smart ass to the cops. They were buddies with us. They knew who we were. And they said something to me. They're like, "You think you can make it to shore from here?" I'm like, "Bitch, I'm a world-class athlete. I could make that." And they're like, "Oh, really? Here, world-class athlete. Here's your ticket." Right. It's like those kind of stories that you can tell. Those are like, that's the good stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah. And I think that's so important for people, for parents, for like teachers to understand that piece. You took all of that.
It's the cliches, like I said, the whole success is a journey, not a destination. I mean,
yeah,
we've all seen that reprinted 1,000 different ways and said by 1,000 different people who sometimes want to take credit for it, but it's so true, right?
Right.
It's about.
And how far does it go back, right? Confucius said it. The Stoics said it. There's certain truisms that have literally, they're in cave paintings. there are truisms for the human existence, for being a person from so long that we have either felt or that we took action on, that Marcus Aurelius put into writing, right? That the Buddha wrote down, like, and it's come from every aspect. Part of the human existence is doing these things for our nervous system. This was the whole point of the book. This is when it struck me in that moment. I have these epiphanies, like I have 8 or 10 of them over the course of my life. And I'm like, oh, wow, that's it. And you look back to ancient writings and it's everywhere that you can find. You took it and you understood this intuitively, even before you thought about it. Because I could see it in you as a freshman. Like, you understood these things intuitively. Talk about your leadership style. Talk about the things that you did as a leader, because you were a leader at Cal, obviously, and you said you had good modeling. True that. The guys you talked about, Sekou and Matt Beck, studs, like, loved them. Lyle Setich, by the way, didn't just start your career, but also started Mike Leach's career. Did you know that?
Yep.
So that's pretty awesome too. And Leach was my guy too.
Yeah.
And so, but you went on to become a player rep, right, for the NFLPA. You were, I talk about this stat all the time. Every time that there's been a player dispute in the NFL, there's been a Cal guy on the opposite side of it. So yourself, myself, Joe Cap, Daryl Ingram, we were all guys that led from that point, because people mattered to us. And why did they matter to you? And talk about the leadership style that you took to it.
Yeah, why did they matter? I think it's because I must have mattered to somebody else at some point. So that gets into the modeling. But I think to be able to put yourself in position to have, I think, the cachet or the swag or the respect of those around you, you have to have done things the right way. I mean, yeah, if you're some lights out superstar, you're going to have eyes on you and people are going to try to model, emulate what you do. I'm not that. I mean, I know that about myself, and that's okay. I would say, know thyself. I say that half jokingly, but know your lane. And then again, be about farming your own land. I mean that. If you do that the right way and say, this is someone who is important to him every day when he comes to work. This person arrives to training camp every year in best shape of anybody else. This is a person who's there before the workday begins and his workout's already done and his film session is done before the first team meeting begins at 8 o'clock with Sean Payton or Dick Vermeil or Bill Parcells, whoever the coach is at the time. You're doing things the right way. So if you're modeling it and living things the right way, then I think you start to get that respect from those who are around you. Well, then, God forbid for some people, because they might be petrified of the idea of having to take a stand on something or to speak on something. To me, you can't be in position to do those things. And if you've done all the other things right to begin with to get you there. But that's where I found myself at times then where suddenly it's like, hey, we need someone who's going to speak on this issue. And then guess what? You're either tapped to do that, asked politely to do that, or no one else is talking. You just got to step up and do it. So I think it's just recognizing, when and how those opportunities and challenges present themselves, and then positioning yourself as well as possible where, if it's me that's needed to do this, then guess what? It's me that needs to do this. And that's where that first step, the first step in overcoming that fear and that anxiety, that's the hardest step to take. And as you take that first step and then the second step, and it doesn't mean it's ever easy to stand up in front of a room full of people and talk, but each step you take makes it a little bit easier, right? It's never easy, but it gets a little bit easier. Then you become more comfortable in it and you recognize, okay, I see people who are responding to me. And then along that process, again, I'm never going to preach. I recognize that I'm not the only one and I'm not the all-knowing. So even though I'm coming from a position of authority or a position of perceived leadership, I'm also willing to ask the question like you do of your cameraman, right? Hey, what input do you have for me? What kind of feedback do we have? Am I thinking about this the right way? All right, what else, everybody? So you gather as much insight and wisdom as possible. And those things just feed themselves, and then it becomes kind of the machine. So I don't know that any of us are just born with it, or one day, the process of being a leader just suddenly lands in your lap. It's an ongoing process, right? And every new experience is going to create some new challenge, and it's being sort of mercurial enough and malleable enough to be able to adapt according to what those circumstances are, and continually reminding yourself that I don't have all the answers. I think, again, I think because it's still a work in progress for me, I think that's been my path.
And that's just amazing. So thoughtful and so self-aware in your answer too, right? Like I felt the same way. You are a naturally curious guy. I remember when we did our fly fishing show together, like you asking a million questions, reminding me very much of Alex Mack, the way he approaches things as well, asking a million questions, and being humble enough to realize that you don't know everything. I think is super powerful in that regard. The way that you approach that, and I think it's such an important lesson for people at home too, is that when you don't know, ask. That was the opening point of our podcast today, right? When you don't know, ask. Ask the question, and then realize that you don't know everything, and be open to hearing it when you do ask the question. I think so many times people will want to learn. They want knowledge, or they recognize they don't learn, but they don't want to hear the answer. Mm-hmm. I think that is the whole stock of politics today, mm-hmm. is that there are people that want answers, but don't want to hear the answer.
Yeah.
How hard is that to deal with?
Oh my gosh, so true. We talked about sort of the parent analogy of the fifth grader with the phone. They want the answer, but not ready to hear what the answer is. I was like, I'm asking you to repeat the question to me because I don't even have to give the answer. The answer is in your question. But that's so true. Yeah, it's so true. I think the other part of it is we talked about sort of the willingness to ask the question, but it's also knowing, when to seek help and having the courage or the vulnerability to ask for help. Because if we are willing to admit and accept the fact that we don't have all the answers, there's a good chance that someone else might have the answer. Or when we're struggling, there's a good chance that someone around us might be able to actually lend a hand to help us. I refer back often now, like I think my early days of my experience as an educator, I tried my best not to lean back on old football stories, but sometimes you can't help it because these cliches again appear over and over and over again. Well, here I am now in my first day sort of post-educator world, and I'm starting to lean back on some of those stories. So this idea of asking for help, I remember, again, opening year in August, all the faculty come back to work, and I usually open the year with some opening comments or some themes for the year. Well, one that I would return to every year is this spirit of asking for help. And I would always show a picture, and they became ready, and they could predict that it was going to happen, and they were expecting it each year because one of those things I wanted to recur year after year. And it opened with a little slide presentation. There was a photo of my wife, Jacqueline, and I standing in front of this Airstream trailer that we bought like 7 or 8 years ago. And here's us looking very happy, my arm around her, getting ready for the maiden voyage. And then, kind of goes to the next slide of us sort of on the journey with this trailer. And then I get to the point where I talk about where I wanted to park this trailer. And we've got this great little spot on our property, and I carved out a nice little pad for it. And to get the trailer down to that pad, I kind of got to thread the needle and back the trailer up between these oak trees to eventually get it parked on that pad. One day I had a really tough day at school, and this was my first year on the job. And this is me telling the story to my teachers. I'm sharing it out with you and your viewers. One day I get home from school and it was one of those really, really tough days where I just, it didn't go well for me and I was struggling. And there were a lot of things coming my way that I just felt, frankly, not emotionally, professionally, or spiritually ready to be able to take on. So I get home and after a day of just struggling, and I decide in that moment that I'm going to go down and back this Airstream trailer and thread the needle down through the trees to get it to this idyllic spot where I've been wanting to have this thing parked for a couple years. All I had to do was go and ask my wife, Jacqueline, hey, spot me while I'm backing this trailer up. All right. So then the very next slide I project forward to shows the whole back end of this thing just completely dented and caved in. Because on a tough day when I was really struggling, I chose to do something that was probably beyond my skill set. And I backed it right into a big old oak tree. If I had just asked for help, and I remember I broke down crying, and it's like, oh my God, walking back to the house, tail between my legs. Jacqueline, I crashed the Airstream. And I'm just sobbing. And it's just like, why would I sob over something like that? It was an accident, first of all, but I just felt such shame, and I was embarrassed about it. And the message to teachers every year is, don't be the guy backing the trailer into a tree. Ask for help. Don't struggle alone. Don't worry alone. Reach out. Ask for help. All it would have taken was 30 seconds for her to say, hey, you're about to hit a tree, maybe 6 inches to your left. That's all it would have taken.
Stop. Right. Yeah. That's all it takes. Just stop. Dude, that is a fantastic story. I love that. And it's so true. As part of my story, you and I talked about this off camera. I suffered from anxiety for 10 years, like really bad anxiety. And the whole time I asked for help up front, I didn't get it right away. The medical system, as we know it in this country, is not well. It needs some medical help itself. But, and so I stopped asking for help and I suffered through this, right? White knuckle held on for a long time until eventually I finally got up the courage to ask for help again. And when I finally did, I found it and it was amazing. And so you got to keep asking for help. Yeah. Don't be discouraged by it either, because that's super important. And I can totally sympathize with the backing of a trailer story with you, because that's like, I've done that backing a trailer wrong myself. I put a pair of Can-Ams into a tree myself. So I know the feeling. I sense it.
Yeah, but it's hard, right? It is hard to ask for help, I think, because we're also wired to not want to inconvenience other people around us. But it's so important. And I don't have that part of it figured out yet either. I'm still working on that. But it's such a critical message for us to continue to echo.
Yeah, for sure. And that's your nervous system too, right? Once we feel exposed, once we feel vulnerable, we're scared to put ourselves out even more. But that's when you need to ask for help. And that gets back to our question about leadership. It gets back to our question really about everything. Is authenticity, vulnerability is where people connect.
Yeah.
Like being vulnerable with you being vulnerable with us, you being vulnerable with parents or kids, especially kids. Like you showing that vulnerability, not being this impenetrable fortress, allows them to connect to you. That vulnerability gives them space to be vulnerable with you. And that's when you get real growth in kids, right? That's when your nervous system really, that's where mirror neurons kick in. That's where our biology kicks in to help us in that regard.
Yeah.
So I absolutely love it. So the question then is, what now for Scott Fujita? We talked about this beforehand. What now for you? Obviously, going to be a dad, going to be a husband, going to take care of that. But what next? Because, and I'm going to tell you, brother, I love you. You know this. I love you. You are like one of my favorite dudes of all time. Just the way you handle yourself, you just have such high integrity. I used to love watching your morning talks that you gave during COVID, online, your social media stuff. So Scott Fujita is one of my heroes. I just love you. So what's next for you?
I appreciate that, Mike. Thank you. That means a lot. I have a ton of respect for you as well. So thank you for saying that. What's next? I don't have a clear-cut answer for that. I think I've learned enough about myself, I think post-football, that I have had a tendency to overcommit or say yes to too many things too quickly. I think that's an important thing to have some self-awareness around as well, right? My older girls now will be juniors in high school, recognizing that, they'll be out of the house here in a couple of years. My youngest daughter is going to be a 7th grader, and recognizing how I think consuming the job, has been for me the last 6 years. And even though, yes, I'm present physically, how present am I for them emotionally, mentally, spiritually, et cetera, right? So I need to recognize that. And I want to be more present for them. I'm at the dinner table with them every single night. But if I poured, my heart and soul into, a lot of other kids and their families, because that was important work and I valued it and loved it so much, is my family getting my leftovers, at the end of the day. and sort of the less optimized version of me. That was one of those things that helped drive my decision a couple of years ago to begin thinking about what next might look like for me. So number one is to, to suck the marrow out of life, or like the hummingbird, from the back porch. I think to be as present as possible. I've also, I think, in a lot of ways, because I think like if a stovetop has 4 burners on it, and it's impossible to have all 4 burners going at one time. So my last, 6 years on this job, I think I've had 2 of the 4 burners going. It's had to be school and it's had to be family, right? And I've neglected, I think, a lot of old relationships and friendships, other than occasional, the text messages to check in. So I really just want to get reconnected with people. I do miss football. I went through a period of time where I think I harbored some resentment toward the game, whether it was, to some experiences I had, injuries I had, one of my best friends was diagnosed with ALS. I was in the middle of the fire during the concussion crisis and the NFL lockout. So there were so many things about it I harbored that, weren't healthy for my view of the game. But now that I've been more removed from it, had some time to step away, and I look back on it, I really do value and appreciate and respect so much the experience. Roger Goodell is another one, Commissioner Goodell. There were certain things publicly where he and I really butted heads on some things because there were issues that were important at the time. But I actually did always have a really good, friendship with him apart from all those things. And he and I reconnected a couple of days ago and just kind of catching up on some things. It's been a long time. Same thing with, coaches and organizations, and the Saints are going to have training camp down in Southern California this year. So I just want to kind of dip my toe back into some of those waters. Doesn't mean I'm going to jump into coaching right away or look for a front office job, but they're relationships of people who are wired like me. And I think it's important to reconnect with some of those folks. The fact that you reached out, a couple of weeks ago for this, honestly, Mike, you and I hadn't connected for a couple of years because life gets busy and in the way. It's like, so I think more of this kind of stuff, because when we talk about the journey, so many of you are such an important part of my journey. And I think I've neglected that quite a bit the last 6 years. So I'm going to prioritize relationships first and reestablish some of those connections before I make any commitments to sort of the what's next, Scott, because I don't have an answer for that one right now.
Well, that's good. You don't always need an answer, but yeah. You have a direction, right? Mm-hmm. And I think if anything, that's kind of the lesson of our whole conversation here, right?
Yeah.
Take that first step. Just pick a direction and go.
Yeah. And
then work from it from there. Not don't have a plan. You got to have a plan. Yeah. There's a story about the Navy SEALs and planning in the book, because we had the former Team 6 sniper team leader teach a sniper school for our show one time. Mm-hmm. It's just because, and he was talking about how they plan, and he's like, yeah, as soon as, plan A blows up, you got to go on to plan B, and then plan C, and then I just take the step, do something, have a reasonable guess, and move, which is our conversation here today, brother.
No doubt about it.
And it's why I appreciate you so much. Seriously. I just love seeing you, love talking to you. I love what you bring to people. And every time I talk to you, I get better. Every single time. And that's the sign of a true leader. That's a sign of somebody who's there for other people, because you have been from day one. So I appreciate you coming on here today. It's always a joy. We all have to catch up in person. We're close. Yeah. We're so close that we need to catch up in person. We'll come down your way. But
I appreciate the work you're doing too. I mean, obviously, you're speaking the language of, it sounds like a neurologist now. So I love how much you poured yourself into this space. Seeing all the growth that you've had, personally, physically, professionally through this. And I admire you sort of sharing what you're learning to help tell your story, but also amplify and share other people's stories. So I applaud you. So appreciate it, and I respect the hell out of you.
Thank you, brother. As always, for everybody at home, if you want to catch up, if you want to be able to reach out to me, you can text GREAT to 55444, and that's GREAT to 55444. We will send you the checklist for mental toughness. We will keep you up to date with our email list, give you all the stories, the behind-the-scenes stuff that you guys don't get. Fuj, I love having you on here today. I appreciate you coming on, brother, as always. For everybody at home, remember, we are bringing you this content. We're bringing you these stories so that you can learn, so that you can live from them. We all live this very human experience, and we're all trying to get better at it every single day. So take what works from you from this conversation here today. Some of this will have definitely resonated with you. Use it to help yourself out and try to live every day great. Till next time, I'll talk to you soon.